Professor Ed Hess, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you back in the conversation with me.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Ed, in 250 plus episodes, I couldn't have thought of a better person for me to have as a repeat guest. You being an author of 15 books, lots of them that I love: Hyper Learning, Humility is the New Smart, and your newest book, Own Your Work Journey: The Path to Meaningful Work and Happiness in the Age of Smart Technology and Radical Change. So, can't wait to have a conversation on your newest book, Ed. But you also start out this book in talking briefly about you as an outsider, the role that you've played as an outsider, and the value that that brings to the insights that you have. Would love to find out a little bit more about your outsider status.
Well, I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. I was, I guess, the first outsider part. I was born 2 pounds, 13 ounces at a time when babies that weight did not live. I was 6 weeks in an oxygen tent, and then, forever my development was, and so, so it's sort of like I started out an outsider. I wasn't supposed to be, but somehow I was. But my family moved to the western part of Georgia, in rural Georgia. My father was an immigrant to this country and from Germany. My mother was from Boston, Massachusetts. Her family were factory workers, and here we came was this little kid and a German guy and a Massachusetts woman into rural Georgia and western Georgia, and this was during a time when there was lots of issues going on. Brown v. Board of Education, segregation, integration, etc. Uh, um, lots of lot, lots of very serious issues. And so my family was an outsider, all right, and I was an outsider because I didn't fit in the culture, but also if you grow up in the South, as you probably know, sports is so important. And so I went out for Pee Wee football in the third grade. And here I was in this little small town, little small school, and I'm the only guy that wasn't chosen to be on the football team because I was too, not an athlete and or too chubby or whatever. And so my family was an outsider, and then I became an outsider. And so I sat back to myself and said, I got to do something. And I said, okay, I want to be the smartest guy in the room. And, that may sound like it's, a know it all, but no, I wanted to, that's how I would make my stand. And my mother would save up money and every, say, couple of months take us to the bookstore. And I get to buy one or two books. And I'd buy books about successful people, doctors, lawyers, sports people. And none of those people lived in my town. They were people all from all over. And so I dreamed about, can I be one of those? I read about New York City. Wow, what would it be like being there? Would it be better for my family, etc.? So reading started me out. And then my mother and father saved up money and bought the Encyclopedia Britannica. And that was how I learned. And so when we started in school having, on Monday morning, the teacher would get everybody up and everybody would stand in a row and she'd ask questions about the Bible. And then the next, maybe a couple of months, she'd go in and ask questions about something else. So I was an avid reader and was very fortunate to have a great memory. And I, in effect, I don't want to say memorized the Bible, but, all of a sudden I became a nobody who was the winner 99% of the time of every one of those conversations. And
Wow.
all of a sudden, people were saying, hey, this kid is smart. I need to know this kid. And that was sort of how I got into being semi accepted. All right, not accepted. Uh, I wasn't accepted, and my family wasn't accepted in the community until basically I was went to the eighth grade, and I talk about it in the book. At the end of the seventh grade, I'd made all A's and everything, and I had friends because I was the smartest guy in the room. I mean, I was the only man not wearing Levi pants because I was couldn't fit me. I wore Wrangler pants. I mean, everything was sort of off base. And and but at the end of the seventh grade, I was sitting at home and I got a phone call, and I answered and said, "Hello." He says, "Is this Ed?" I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Who's this?" He says, "This is Coach Grisham." Coach Charles Grisham was the most outstanding football coach in the state of Georgia. Uh, he was a little G God. Okay. He said, "You come into the eighth grade, right?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Would you like to be an athletic trainer?" I said, "What's an athletic trainer?" He says, "You tape ankles and I'll teach you and you'll be sort of like my aide." And I said, "Well, I don't know how to tape ankles." He says, "I know that. I'll teach you how to do it." He said, "There's only one requirement." I said, "What's that, coach?" He said, "I want you to be at my house at 7:30 every morning. And for the next 5 years, you're going to ride to school with me." And so September comes, my my father drops me off, and I'm sitting shotgun next to the most powerful man in West Georgia. And as soon as that, all of a sudden, everything changes for my family, for me. All of a sudden, we were, and it was like he put his hand on me and the family and said, "Blessed be these people, don't mess with them." And that was, amazing. And he stayed with me all the time. He encouraged me to write the article on being a trainer in high school, and it was published in the national magazine. And that led to me getting a full athletic scholarship as a trainer to University of Florida. So I got to go to college because of him. And so it was I was an outsider, but basically because we behaved in certain ways, person came out and accepted us. And but if you look at it, if you look at my career, and I don't mean to be going on all about me, but I've had 4 different careers. All right, 3 of them I weren't trained for. So all my life, I've been a lifelong learner. All right, going into the unknown and figuring stuff out. Okay, I went to Wall Street, and I was from being a lawyer. I didn't know anything about finance. I told the chairman that. I says, "I don't know anything about finance." He wanted me to basically run a private equity group. I said, "I don't know anything about finance." He says, "I know that, but I know you'll know." I said, I can't do an IRR." He says, "I know that, but I know you'll be able to do it by next Monday." And so that's sort of, you know, the essence. And so I I never it never was a big ego thing. It was a thing about, I guess, trying to be successful in an environment which, you know, didn't want you, all right, or didn't fit into. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there are two beautiful aspects that come out of the story you shared, Ed. One is that what you admire so much in the coach, having taken you under his wings and made your family one that was accepted in this new community, is something that I have seen you do often with others yourself. So it is the fact that you get joy out of elevating other people. And
Yes.
additionally, you mentioned the fact that you've changed 4 careers. You do talk in this book about how we are going to need to unlearn relearn at a faster rate, and careers will not look anything like even they do today, let
Right.
alone what our parents experienced. So you've also had to go through some of that reinvention.
Yes.
Now, you talk about the fact that this is a new time, a new era. What is so different about this era? There's been technological progress, at least over the past 100 years, pretty significant technological progress. And there has been different aspects of transformation throughout humanity. Why do you think now is a different time with respect to uh, technological progress and this radical change, requiring us to retool ourselves?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And there's two reasons: speed and, if you will, closeness. The speed of change is definitely accelerating. And because of how we live today, okay, we don't live in small groups in the savannah, hunting for meat, all right, and we're isolated, all right. We knowledge or information is dumped upon us every day with the devices, the etc. And so the quantity of stuff that's in effect, a lot of it comes, we didn't ask for it. The quantity of information and the purpose of the use of information is huge. The speed at which it's changing and accelerating is the highest it's ever been. All right. I mean, it took, in history, even if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, it took lots of years for the Industrial Revolution to occur, but it took a lot of years for it to, the outcomes, all right, to be manifested. Where today something can change. I mean, the life cycle of a company today is much, much shorter than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. The ability to access, whether it's capital, information, or people, the ability of people to work from home, work remotely, work in Asia, but also work for Asia for US companies, as an example. It's a whole different game. And this game is going to continue to accelerate. I think a big move has been made when you look at the big technology companies and count up basically the tens of thousands of layoffs they've made in the last 3 months. If technology is saying we don't need as many people, technology's doing more, or we're going this direction, goodness gracious, what does that say to a quote non-technology company? So I think it's accelerating internally, it's accelerating globally, in the sense that more and more players are realizing that we are in a race from a technological viewpoint. I mean, China understands that with the Silk Road project, all right, where they're basically building technology foundations across Africa and Asia and South America, all right. And so the organizations in the future that have the most data are going to be the organizations that basically are able to be ahead of everyone else. So what does that mean for us? What it means for us is that the life cycle of our knowledge is we've got to basically become a highly adaptive learner, to learn and unlearn and relearn at the speed of change. And as you know, we're not wired that way. All right. And so there's going to be a huge competition for, all right, how do we basically take ourselves to a different level? And that competition is going to end up being also globally. between some of the global competitors and the U.S. competitors. Every organization, I don't care whether you're nonprofit, profit, what type of business you're in, whether you're in the education field, every organization is going to be basically challenged by keeping up. Keeping up. Well, to have a highly adaptive learning organization, what do you need? Highly adaptive people. And we're not wired to be highly adaptive people. We have to rewire ourselves. And that's what this book is about. We have to rewire ourselves because whether we like it or not, we're all going to be impacted. And so the book is an invitation. Take ownership of you. Take ownership of you. Okay? Take ownership of you and learn how to learn better, to think better, to listen better, to collaborate better. Okay? And to manage what's going on inside of you better. And and that's sort of like the story, because that's when people will be able to have meaningful work, meaningful relationships, and ultimately, in most cases, that's happiness. And so what's at stake here? If you look back and you think about the hunter-gatherer days, a long time ago, right? Hunter-gatherer days. People came together, and even you could go and modernize it to the indigenous areas of the world and how they lived, all right? And how people learned in the councils, the sitting around, and everyone spoke and was listened to and had say. And then the leaders would debate, all right? And generally speaking, the men leader would make the decision. And in making the decision, he would always turn his right cheek over and look at his spouse to see if she approved. Although women weren't in the circle, women did control the circle. We're in a similar situation here. We're all going to be in a circle. Okay, now what's the other problem? Our culture is a survival of the fittest culture. All right? Probably, I don't know if there's anyone more severely survival of the fittest, but most of the cultures in the world are not survival of the fittest. So what is a survival of the fittest culture? What's the purpose of that? Think about that. What's the purpose of a survival of the fittest culture? The people who sort of created that culture after the Roosevelt administration, the survival of the fittest culture is to get everybody competing here where nobody figures out that there's this group that's running this whole show. As long as we keep you busy going like this, we're not going to keep you going like this. And that's got to change. We've got to open ourselves up and embrace ourselves and embrace others, because the biggest competition you and I are going to have going forward is not others, it's us. To be a highly adaptive learner, which is to take ownership of you so you can bring your best self to work every day. The best you, that's going to be all of our goals. And if you think about our education system, it's so diverse. To get anything done in the public school system has to, you got the federal part, you got the state part, and then you got the local part. All right. The amount of time it takes to do change and embrace new ways of learning is years. We don't have years, folks. We don't have years. Game is on.
Yeah, and one of the things I appreciate, Ed, is that you have both laid out a framework and made this as a workbook for us to take ownership over our own journey. And that there are a couple of things you mentioned I wanted to highlight. I do believe and agree with you that we have a very hard time with understanding the scale of change. I had a conversation with Azim Azhar. He was talking about the exponential technologies and their changes. And I do a talk for leadership groups on exponential change. And in most instances, while they're nodding, most people have a very hard time conceptualizing the changes that we have in front of us. And I've been having conversations with CEOs of AI companies and some AI experts, and it's astronomical the pace and speed of change. Even if you look at ChatGPT 3.5 to ChatGPT 4 and the capabilities of it, it's mind-boggling. So this I do want to find out more with respect to your positive perspective on our future if we do the right things based on what you lay out in the book. In that you say we need to add value in ways that technology can't add
Yes.
value.
Yes.
However, one of the things that I was surprised with respect to generative AI, ChatGPT, is that it is very creative. In some instances, more creative
Yes.
than people would be. Or there was a chess grandmaster who was defeated a couple of months back in chess by a 19-year-old, and people figured out he must have been cheating because the move that the 19-year-old made, they came up with the fact that no human would have come up with that move. That move was more creative, smarter than any human. So it seems like technology is moving so fast. How can we then add value in a way that technology can't add value?
Yeah. There's three ways to do that, and they we'll call it have different strengths based on what you're talking about. The biggest thinking way, thinking in ways that technology can't think right now, okay, at least now, all right, is going into the unknown and figuring things out, all right, being explorers. And so thinking in, higher order critical thinking, higher order exploration thinking, um, making decisions when there's lots of uncertainty and little data. That's one area. The second, and probably the most, it's as important, but probably will end up being the key way that we are different than technology, is the ability for human beings to build caring, trusting, positive emotional relationships with other human beings. And in the workplace, what this means in this pace of acceleration, most human work is going to be done in teams. And so the quality of the output of the team is directly dependent upon the quality of the emotional state of the group. And so, at least in the foreseeable future, yes, we've got, AFs being built where children can have their little robot who's going to say nice things to them. But the emotional connection thing, all right, it's going to be a long time before a robot will be able to, if you will, relate emotionally to human beings, all right, at different levels depending on the situation. That's probably the ultimate differentiator. The third thing is trade jobs, all right? If you're in a trade that basically requires dexterity, lots of moving around, and iterative diagnostic definition of the problem, and then iterative trial and error approaches to solving the problem, you're going to have work for quite a while. All right. The technology is not at the point of being able to go, underneath, basements, to go, up and around, but also it's also the ability to diagnose, then the ability to come up with fixes, but to iterate the fixes. All right. So technology is advancing very fast, I would say, on the thinking side where there's data. All right. Thinking side where there's data. Thinking when you don't have a lot of data, which is innovation. All right. And you can even say creativity, but we'll call it innovation exploration. And again, going back to this positive emotional relationships. So going forward, we have to sit there as human beings and say, well, how good a thinker are we? All right. It's, I quit it. I think that I asked 2,000 senior executives over a period of time. Okay. It was years of work. How do you think? All right. That's a simple question. And 2,000 people, I rarely got an answer that made sense. The key answers were, it just pops up in my mind. I don't know what happens. Okay. I did have one senior executive who was a woman who basically said, I basically asked myself these questions. All right. One person. All right. I'll give you another example of what's going on. In our ego is a big issue in our country. All right. It's very competitive. All right. I've done it with, I think it's 1,400 leaders, from military leaders to corporate leaders to people that are in, foundations, looking at, if you will, the question, and having them do diagnostics. And the number one winner of the biggest need is to learn how to quiet ego. Ego is such a big problem in our culture and in our people. Okay. And then the second one is how to listen reflectively. Most people come to the table to advocate or to get affirmation or to win. All right. Many people, when the other person's talking, their mind is creating the answer while the person's talking. Okay. So all of this stuff about how we're wired to become a highly adaptive person for this new age, we got to rewire ourselves. All right. That's why there's 29 tools in the book. The book's one of my shorter books on purpose. It's 132 pages of content. But it's fundamentally, it's a how-to book. All right. How to overcome what will hold us back, how to develop ourselves. It's what I call becoming the champion of you. To take ownership of it, to own it, and to use tools and practices, etc. And I know that you have done that. You have trained yourself. People, again, it's just, I'm not laughing at people. It's just sort of comical. I've been in so many meetings with executives and everything, and they get into a meeting and they get arguing with their people and everything. and I'll raise my hand. I says, do I have permission to speak freely? Of course, Ed, you always have permission. Well, that's not really true. Uh, they always say yes, but they don't like what's coming. And I said, anytime I say something, do you realize you had a choice as to whether to say what you said this way or another way? And people look at me like I'm crazy. What do you mean I had a choice? It just came up in my mind. I'm a smart person. I'm the smartest person in the room. It just came up in my mind and I said it. No, we all have choices. Choices how we think, how we listen, how we relate. Okay. Choices how we behave. All right. Choices how we speak. I was looking this morning and everything, and it thinking about today, and this choice about speech. You know, page 80, 83, 84 of the book. Bottom line, I've got a quote from Roshi Joan Halifax, the 5 gateways of speech to ask yourself. And I just want to, this is an example. Number 1, is my speech, but she says, is it true? Is it kind? Is it beneficial? Is it necessary? Is it the right time? So if you think about it, if you or I adopted that and we were reflective and knowing we're in a situation with people that's tense, that's competition, etc., and asked ourselves, is what we're thinking really true? Are we being kind and whatever? I mean, it's the choices, and that's what this book basically brings out. We are the choices we make. We are the choices we make, and we have the power to choose. And so I'm inviting people to embrace that power and use the practices and tools and do the work. And I've never had anybody accept that and ever said, it didn't work. It's a waste of time. I didn't enjoy it. I'm not grateful for it. Da 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 da. It is. It's all comes down to. It's just like if you think of, you think of great musicians and how much they train. You think of great athletes. All right. I mean, most NBA teams, all right, have mindfulness meditation coaches. Okay. I mean, the great NBA players take Steph, all right? I mean, that he can basically be flying down the court as soon as he crosses half court, all right? He can go up and shoot and swish 3 points. How does that happen? All right? It happens because he's in control of everything inside of him. And he has done the work, all right? Great warriors, all right? I've talked with some of the great warriors, and they work on calming themselves. I mean, and calming themselves in situations. Okay, I mean, I'd be scared to death. All right, but they've learned how to calm themselves and to be. And if you think about it, you go to the military as an example with the drones and everything that's coming. The people sitting at the computer station, all right, or the people sitting in the field with that's basically just typing what's going to happen. Think about how they have to be in order to make sure they're doing the right thing. And all I'm saying in the book is that's going to apply to everybody in the workforce.
And you also, as you mentioned, Ed, there are a couple of things I wanted to highlight. One is the fact that these are practices. You also talk about growth mindset, Carol Dweck's work, in that I appreciate the kind words, but none of us, we are not there yet. we need to continually work on it.
Yeah.
And the ego that you mentioned, which is a big challenge for all of us, and I see a huge challenge with respect to the way leadership has worked. So, part of what you're saying is we need to take ownership of our own ego.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
there is internal work that needs to happen
Yes.
with this external chaos, this external pace of change. So, how would you encourage leaders to do that, Ed? In that I've seen many times, uh, talking about ego is really, really hard
Yes.
because we tend to put up big portraits of the CEO of the organization up on the walls. We tend to celebrate the outlier entrepreneur who has done great things, not regarding any impact of destruction they've had, move fast and
Yes.
break things, what they have broken. So, as individuals, how can we take ownership and control that ego in order to then be able to do some of the other things you also recommend?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're quite correct. That's a big challenge. Okay. Um, the two biggest inhibitors of learning are ego and fear. And you're talking about CEOs, so I'm going to just talk about CEOs for a moment. My experience over the last 20 years with CEOs, there are CEOs that in almost got to that point on their own, like Herb Kelleher at Southwest Airlines, God rest his soul. All right. People like that. All right. But what's so interesting in any type of work I've done in companies, the CEO has got to basically be the leader. And the funny thing is as I said, the two biggest inhibitors to learning is ego and greed. The two biggest enablers of change, or the biggest enabler of change in a CEO, is ego, in the sense that they're fearful if they don't do this, they will be a loser. And so it's complex at that level. And so with CEOs, I have found there has to be a compelling why that they're doing this. I remember one CEO I was working with, a public company and everything, and he was very proud of all his learning stuff and learning and development stuff. I was sitting in his office and we were talking, and I says, "How many leadership traits do you have that you want your people to use?" He said 72. I said, "Okay." All right. I looked at him and I said, "Can you name me?" And I had the list already. I said, "Can you name me the top five?" And he started looking around. I says, "No, no, no. You're the leader. You know it. You should know. You know the order. Tell me the top five." He couldn't name the top five. So I says, "Why don't you start out with five leadership traits? And let's work on five." Okay. And so you get to this thing. I don't have an easy answer on how a leader transform themselves in light of the speed at which things are going. I'm only sharing with you that in those engagements where I have been successful, I have used ego as a positive way with the leader to say and ask the questions, what do you want your legacy to be? Okay, well, I want the company to still to be a great company. Okay, well, in light of this new environment with all of the change and people having to change and learn new things, how are you going to do that? And they usually say, well, that's why I'm talking to you. I says, no, but how are you going to do it? He says, I got to support it. I got to lead it. I said, yes, you got to own. You have to take ownership of what you want invested in your people. And what generally happens is as their people, their direct reports start buying into this, he buys into it or she buys into it. Because then we have the conversations, the one-on-ones, when you were having this conversation and everything, let's focus on this here. How do you think I did with that? Oh, I was okay. Everybody agreed. I said, let's focus in. Did people ask questions? Did people challenge you? Oh, why do you think no one challenged you? And they look at me and they eventually say, you think they were afraid? I says, maybe they were. So what can you do to make them less afraid? I think I got to basically, make them afraid of not challenging me. I said, all right, let's go down that route. I mean, it gets that granular. All right. But it takes hard work. It does work, but the outcome is huge for the organization. It's huge for people's options, but it's huge for all the people in the organization. And there are companies that are working hard on this, all right, as you know. But it doesn't come easy. That's why the whole concept of deliberate practice and people working on small number of things and holding themselves accountable and having accountability partners, that comes out of the science, the cognitive science. You pick and you start with 2 or 3 fundamental things and you work hard on that for, could be several months, but people see the changes and then they start playing in game with you. And all of a sudden, the quality of the conversations are going up. You're more effective, okay? We're seeing more things. And effectively, the machine and the wheel starts turning and it becomes more self-fulfilling. But you're right, it has to start at the person at the top, okay? It can be the president of a company if it's a diverse, I had very early on in my career a major company that had multiple subsidiaries. And we built a program like this in one subsidiary, all right? Because the CEO of that subsidiary wanted to do it. All of a sudden, he forgot to tell his people, don't go brag how great they were doing to people in different subsidiaries. And about a year and a half later, all the other CEOs of the other subsidiaries went to the CEO and says, they're doing something different than us. And if you didn't approve it, you got to stop it. And the CEO shut it down. Okay. That's a true story. But it's this, but this is not rocket science. This is not rocket science. It's coming to the realization, and you can define it different ways. I want to be more successful. I want my team to be successful. I want to be a kind, caring person. I want to, whatever it is, people can come up with their own story. The key is doing the practices in the daily work, and you do the daily work. I know you do. The daily work works. All right, the daily work works. Yeah, some of us have, we all every once in a while make a mistake, have an up and down, and we got to make amends. But it's getting people believing, and so when I say the lower you go in the organization, I'm talking hierarchy. All right, but very few businesses, public companies or private companies, are engaged in trying to help people at the lower level of the hierarchy. And if you think about what technology is saying to us, is the speed of change is going to be such that you're going to have to basically stay abreast of us, which means you're going to have the highest performance beginning at the lower levels coming up. The game has changed. Welcome to the new game, ladies and gentlemen. The game has changed.
And that higher level of performance that you talk about, Ed, requires that recognition that, as you mentioned, competition going forward is us, it's not
Yes.
other people.
Right.
Therefore, uh, being able to quiet our ego. You talk about the six attributes that define humility. And I also mentioned repeatedly on the podcast, you can, confidence and humility are not mutually exclusive. Actually, some of the most confident people I know, such as you, have tremendous humility. It's typically people who lack confidence who don't
Yes.
have that humility.
Yeah.
So you address those in the book as well, in a way that, as you mentioned, these are practices that you talk about that we need to work on an ongoing basis
Yes.
as the world around us is changing. And one of the other things you briefly mentioned before I wanted to touch on is that need to calm our minds, the power of mindfulness and meditation,
Yes.
which, by the way, another brilliant author, Yuval Noah Harari, who is a little bit more dystopian in his view of where AI is headed,
Yes.
part of what he says can help us tap into our humanity is also that mindfulness, meditation, and getting to know ourselves better.
Yes.
So, what are practices you recommend for us to engage in order to do better with that as the world around us changes at a faster rate?
Yeah. Well, mindfulness meditation is foundational. All right. Taking ownership of your mind. All right. And it is sort of a linchpin which enables other things. All right. It helps enable a quiet ego. Okay. It enables a quiet mind. It helps enable a quiet body. And so if you're going to start out, mindfulness meditation is a key practice. And there's lots of great professional meditators and the world. I mean, that's easy. And they all have websites and etc. As to how to do that. And you start out, basically, trying to meditate for 2 minutes or 3 minutes. All right. And you do it. The key is the consistency. And meditation is basically your goal is a state where you're totally quiet inside. All right. But as soon as something pops in your mind, instead of letting it take over you, you basically ignore it by breathing in and out. All right. And so that's the first key step that if you were say, where do I start? The second step that works very well is gratitude practices. And gratitude practices helps generate a quiet ego. And so let's say that you buy into the program and you're going to do mindfulness meditation. You're going to start out for 2 to 3 minutes. And in the book, it basically has exactly what you should do. And it's start 2 to 3 minutes, then you go up to 5, then you go up to 10 and 20. And then there's someone like you who's been working for years at it, you who knows where you are, but you could be 30, 40. The really, the Dalai Lama meditates 3 hours a day. Well, none of us are ever going to get there, all right, and still be working. Okay. But you don't have to get there. But after the meditation, to give gratitude, okay, to say, I'm grateful to Jane for doing this. And then you say, I need to basically tell Jane, all right? So you do gratitude practices, all right? Even in thinking about gratitude, I am thankful to Jim for helping me. Thank you, Jim. Saying those words generates positive emotions in our body. being able to generate positive emotions is mission critical to the journey we're on, as well as being able to manage negative emotions. But the positive emotions, the gratitude practices, also sends another message to us. We didn't do this all by ourselves. And that will help quiet the ego. So if you start out with mindfulness meditation and gratitude practices at the beginning, okay, you start small. It will be frustrating forever. It is for most people because our minds, especially, busy people, smart people, everybody's got so much going on. Oh, sit here and just be quiet. Oh, this is boring. This is boring. I got to get the kids breakfast. Oh, gee. Oh, what am I going to say to the boss? No. Start 1 to 2 minutes. It'll take you time. Okay. You maybe in 2 months will be at 10 minutes, maybe. It doesn't matter because it's all working. You're rewiring yourself. And everybody that has stuck with it that I know says it is not only mission critical, but they're not going to turn back. They're not going to turn back. And so those are the two: mindfulness meditation, gratitude, and then I'll add a third one: breathing, deep breathing. You're going into a meeting, you're just coming out of a meeting, the mind is flying, the blood is flying, you're, oh man, I'm just energized. Slow down. Let's basically do some, 1 or 2 minutes of deep breathing. Breathe in. Okay, there's two different practices: coherent breathing practices and the Navy SEALs box 4 breathing. Breathe in counting 4, hold your breath counting 4, breathing out counting 4. Do that 4 or 5 times, then you walk into the meeting and you've calmed your body down. That's all part that helps you with the meditation. So taking deep breaths can slow down. Many people get into trouble and do either use words that are not appropriate or hurt people or do things they want to regret because they're reflexive. I feel this, do this. No, slow down. Take a deep breath. It's interesting. When I was much, much younger, my wife is a scientist and very, 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 she's a scientist down at work. But the scientist part, when this came through, when we first got married and everything, we were having a conversation and it was getting a little heated. And she looked at me and she says, "Whoa, slow down. Do you know that just because you feel something, you don't have to say it? You can just think about it." And I looked at her and I says, "What do you mean?" She says, "You just said this. Did you think about how I would feel by hearing that?" I said, "No, it just came out." She says, "Do you know that you can stop it before it comes out?" I said, "No, I didn't know that." It's that deep breathing. So you take deep breathing before you go into a meeting. Stillness. See, all these practices, people are listening and everything, and they're saying, "This is not complex. What's the big deal?" You're right, it's not that complex. The big deal is you taking ownership and basically doing it consistently. That's what retrains your body. That's how you take ownership of your mind, your body, your emotions, your listening, your behaviors, your words, because you're taking ownership of you.
I love that, Ed, for so many different reasons. I might have mentioned to you in the past, I had initially done my undergrad and did some grad work in human nutrition before going to business school. And sometimes I would get frustrated. I still keep up with nutrition. I would get frustrated with the fact that people are looking for magical answers and cures, while the reality of diet is very much was captured by Michael Pollan, and also some work that Dan Buettner had done, which is eat uh, r- eat real foods, mostly plants, not too much, and add the Dan Buettner part, move naturally, and connect with the community, right? So you put that together, that is very simple,
Yeah,
yet it is hard for all of us practice. However, a lot of times people are looking for magic cures. Start your day drinking this drink or juice, or take this vitamin, it will solve all of your problems. That's part of what I love about your point and your message, is that it's well researched, and people might nod and say, "Oh, gratitude, that makes sense. Aha, take a breath. Okay, good. I've heard that before. Mindfulness, sure." Yes, because these work when practiced.
that's
And
right.
part of what we need to do is not look for magical cures, but go through the exercises that you lay out to practice this.
Yes,
That is how, whether it is with nutrition and health, we improve our nutrition and our health,
yes,
or in this instance, improve ourselves, our minds, in this world of fast changing, a fast pace of change and smart technology. So
yes,
it's the practice that is
that's right.
important.
That's right. It is, you have to do the practice. That's right. And that's why when I talk to people, I talk about great athletes or great warriors or great musicians, a great violinist. All right. How long does she or he practice? And even the great ones, okay, the great ones at the top, you speak with them and they're practicing every day more than they practiced when they started out. And I'll ask them, how many times do you do this? Every day. Okay. I mean, it's that deliberate practice. And and I've also found that it helps a lot to have an accountability partner, to have someone you share. I'm doing this with um, uh, my friend Marshall Goldsmith has an accountability partner. All right, wherever he is in the world, and etc. Doing his consulting work, he calls that partner at a certain time every night to check in on where he is on his practices. I mean, and so it's and so what we have to do, people have to trust us, what we're talking about, and try it and do the deliberate practice, have the accountability partner, and give it enough time. And then once it catches you and you say, this is working, you keep it up. All right. The athletes or you know, I'll take the warriors who train themselves the same way. Okay. Once they get good, all right, do you think they basically say, okay, I got it, I don't have to do that anymore? No, first thing what happen is, all right, they get shot. Okay. I mean, you just keep going. But it's not, in the beginning, it's challenging, but it gets to the point where, you've been doing it a long time. I've been doing it a long time. If for some reason you or I, it's rare, but you or I miss it, miss a time, okay, we know immediately and we regret doing that. And I don't know about you, but then, if I haven't done it in a long time, but I mean, if I were to do it, I know that as soon as I could, I would do it. And if I couldn't do it until I got home, I would double down. All right. And I'd go through and I'd really think where I screwed up during the day because I didn't bring my best self to the table.
Yeah, one of the practices that I've learned in part through these conversations, Ed, has been journaling and trying to be reflective. In that, it's easy again to talk about ego and controlling the ego. I can say it to other people. However, there are times when I reflect on my day, the way I have behaved, the way I've interacted, or the decisions I've made have been driven by ego rather than being driven by deeper thoughts and emotions. So it is a practice, and part of what you're saying is some of it comes with the intention of the practice of the mindfulness around it. And some of it can come from reflection on
Yes.
how we are.
Yes.
Because the same way as a violinist, as you mentioned, or a warrior or an athlete has to practice every single day consistently to maintain and improve their level of performance. If we want meaningful work and happiness, most especially in this age where our world is changing at a very fast pace, it requires going through this practice. So I
Yeah.
would love to get one more of your thoughts on this, Ed, is that you mentioned critical thinking and the importance of critical thinking. And I'm finding it difficult to see a path forward with fewer of us doing critical thinking and much more tailored content developed. Even more of it will be through generative AI that keeps us from being able to become critical thinker. So
Yeah.
what are some practices you recommend for us to engage in to be critical thinkers in this noisy world?
Yeah. Well, first, I agree with you. I think the biggest void in our country is the lack of critical thinking. I mean, there's scientific research out there by top notch people at NYU and Stanford and other places that our education system is basically we're not critically thinking in our colleges or universities. Everybody is so sensitive and fragile. All right. Um, and so, I mean, critical thinking is if we basically accept the fact, all right, that we don't know everything, all right, and that what we know may be wrong because we haven't basically stress tested or we haven't done the practices. We get to the point of being able to say, well, how do I think? And, you know, basically the book has got a critical thinking checklist, critical thinking purposes and questions, the 5 whys, root cause analysis, my friend Gary Klein's premortem tool, the U.S. Army Action Review. And so there's critical, and then the definition of critical thinking. And so people will have a template, the questions to ask themselves that will help them think critically. The challenge we have in our society right now is have people to have people understand that a significant amount of what we know may not be correct. All right. Because we don't have enough data. And so much of it is emotionally driven. Okay. And this is this is a big issue here. It's a big issue culturally, whether it's social divisiveness, other types of um, you'll see a different way of thinking today in the Nordic countries or some of the other countries in Europe, in the Netherlands, for example, um, in their education system. And so we have got to, it's we have gotten to the point where higher education is it's hard to have debate. It's hard to have debate. It's hard, and it's ego, but plus it's emotional. Everybody wants to be loved, everybody wants to be liked, and everybody's looking out for who's against them and whatever. And we got ourselves, and part of this was technology driven. All right, part of it's been technology driven, and we've got to change that, because if we as a country are in a world competition, and having a large group of the best thinkers is mission critical. All right. And so there's checklists. People just need to go down in the checklist are questions. Did I do this? Have I looked at this? Have I thought of this? If I believe this, then what? Is to give people that and make it, I don't want to say easy to learn, but we take away I don't know how. I don't know how to do this. Okay, here it is. Here's the questions. Okay, here's the purpose of critical thinking. Here's what you ask yourself, and then you write down your answers. And then again, it's practice. You do this enough, you'll start automatically asking yourself the questions without looking at what's in the book. And
Yes, because I find that the questions in the book move us toward where I believe we need to move to, which is greater clarity and less certainty. I find one of the challenges with the critical thinking is the fact that in a slower changing world, it would be okay to feel certain about the future and not be a critical thinker. Still, it was good back then, but now it's essential, as you say.
yes,
So we can have clarity, but with critical thinking, avoid that certainty,
yes,
which also affects our conversations, as you're saying, whether in the education system or elsewhere. So I really appreciate the fact that for me, this book is not one that I have read. It's one that I am continuing to practice and will continue to practice because, as I mentioned earlier on in the conversation, also, I do truly believe and 100% agree with you that this pace of technological and radical change is going to pull both at the fabric of society and the individuals. However, the positive message comes from Professor Ed Hess. We have control over that. Our competition is not others, it's us. And you have laid out the framework of how we can do that.
yes.
So, how can the audience find out more about your book, Ed, and connect with you?
Well, they can connect with me on LinkedIn is the easiest. They can also, it's easy to find out, I'm at the University of Virginia, my school. They can send me text. They can send me, I'm happy to do that. And I think that you're quite correct. Uh, it's the getting started in understanding that I can take ownership. I need to be on this journey. And, and along the way, they'll find cohorts and people who are on the journey, and they'll find partners, so to speak, quotes around partners. All right. And I think the one thing I would leave people with, I can basically say, and this is not bragging and this is not ego. But me having learned that I needed to do the journey and actually being on the journey, and I'm still on the journey. I haven't reached the top or anything. Uh, my goal is to be on the journey until the last breath, to be honest. All right. Because I know we can always be better, so to speak. But I invite people, give it a try and give it a real try. All right. The book lays out the end of the book. It's at the end of the book. It basically starts out with here's things that are mission critical for your first 3-4 months. Work 3-4 months on this, and it doesn't add up to an hour a day. Okay, start small, start deliberate, have an accountability partner, keep your journal thing is mission critical. Okay, and you go back and you review your journals also. All right, I know you do that with your journals, I do that with my journals. And and you always say, goodness gracious, I'm still doing this, and I wrote like 3 years ago I needed to be fixing that. What's going on here? Okay, let's put this at the top of the order. uh, that's the And you will find different people. But what's going to be very interesting is that people are going to find you, because people want to be around people who basically have other people's interest at heart. People want to have meaningful relationships. Okay, I talk about meaningful work and happiness. Well, happiness comes from meaningful relationships. Okay, I don't know of any person that I've ever met or ever heard about has been a very happy person by him or herself. Okay, and so it's bringing this whole game together. And you're right, it's based not only in science, but it's based on the great Eastern and Western philosophies, and it's based on the great 7 religions. If you study the great Eastern and Western philosophies and the 7 great religions, which I know you have, you know, they all come to the same point. The same point. And those points are in the book. All right. In a short, short how-to book. And that's why I self-published it and put it on Amazon. I wanted it to be affordable for every person. And so the book is $7.95, and the Kindle version is $3.95. Okay, I mean, $3.95. You can't go buy a hamburger for $3.95 anymore, right?
Can't get a Starbucks coffee for that.
You can you can't get us. You can't. No, you can't. You can. In fact, you're at the stage there where you're almost getting. You can buy the printed book for the Starbucks thing, but it's you know money's not going to hold you back. And also because I'm encouraging people and leaders to encourage the people that they're responsible for. Notice I didn't say manage, I didn't say own, I didn't say direct, I did not say report. That you are responsible for, to help them. Because why? It's going to make them better. And what's that going to do for the organization? It's going to be better. And what's going to do for you? You're going to be better. Okay. Nobody's ever had their stock options or salary decreased because of increased performance. Right?
Well, I know, Ed, you want to have a positive impact and help elevate others. And you have done that through your work, your books, and most especially this book, Own Your Work Journey: The Path to Meaningful Work and Happiness in the Age of Smart Technology and Radical Change. And you say in it, this is a how to book.
Yeah.
It is a learn by doing book. It is a create your new storybook.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ed Hess, for
Thank you.
helping us create our new stories.
Thank you very much. All the best.